What a desolate place this is.
For Tatooine, I made an illustration showing 3PO and R2 coming across the desert, and you could see their base capsule in the background. I had done artwork that went into films, but not a feature film and not anything that matched live action. George would let me know what he wanted, basically, and I would tear through the thing rather quickly. I didn't think my paintings would be reproduced. They were just there to make everybody clear as to what George wanted the film to look like. Tatooine was to be a desert planet. I had a photograph of a big rock on the Oregon coast that I put in for a background. Instead of the ocean, I put the desert in.
We must be cautious.
I did the Tusken Raider painting and the Sandcrawler and R2-D2. There was a whole gang of stuff. I was sitting there working on these drawings, and I was thinking to myself, gee, maybe this thing really will get to be a film, you know. I thought, oh, this is too much, too expensive, just reaching too far out. But sure enough.
Tatooine's one of the most important locations in the Star Wars series, and the reason is that's where everything begins for Luke. There's a number of techniques that were done, and a lot of it was shot in Tunisia. Some of it, the land crawler, was actually shot in Death Valley and with a model about 2 or 3 feet long here in California. Some of the distant views of Tatooine are actually a matte painting. The pod was a model shot against a painting that Ralph McQuarrie did.
My first big scene with alien dialogue took place when the Jawas capture R2-D2 and carry him into the Sandcrawler. You couldn't go out and just record Jawas anywhere. I started out with a gentleman who spoke Zulu, got him to tell me stories and to act out little vignettes, different emotion, you know, angry, laughing, curious. And then we just sort of imitated it from there on. A few of my USC cinema friends, we went out to Vasquez Rocks, which is a state park north of LA with a nice echo. We would go out there and yell, "Utidi," and this sort of stuff. Utidi! I think I just put everything in it that I found was amusing at the time, because we had so many little personalities as you went along. I found that if I drew upon sounds in the real world that you couldn't immediately identify, it gave real credibility to Tatooine. While they were filming in Tunisia, George heard the braying of the donkeys that were used to transport gear to their location and thought that would make a good sound of the Tusken Raiders. It was a living flesh and blood animal that gave it a whole sense of reality.
Tatooine, of course, is where Mos Eisley is and where the cantina sequence takes place. And that sort of sets the real fun of the movie. And a lot of the barroom stuff was shot in England, but then a lot of it was also done back here in Los Angeles with various masks that were made and shot, I believe, in one day. A lot of my friends actually had made the masks and were playing the characters themselves. And it was done just as a little insert. And yet, that's so important in the film and so memorable that it really added to the spirit of being in a foreign place.
Luke! Tell Uncle if he gets a translator, be sure it speaks Bocce.
Luke's home was actually a hotel in Tunisia, and not some elaborate matte painting or anything like that. It's reality, a real place they picked, and I think that really helped the film seem very, very believable, because it was done on a real location.
Did you see that? What? I always wanted him to have more fun doing it. I mean, I still think, pardon me, George's "Could This Be Dianoga Poo Poo" was a wonderful ad lib. And he looked at me like I had just shot his pet dog and put his foot on my chest and pushed me back into the trash compactor. Because that's what it was, a Dianoga. There's all this stuff floating around in the water. I said, pardon me, George. But no, but see, that to him was really inappropriate humor at the time, because I'm sure he's in the zone and he's seeing what he wants to do, and we're just like actors trying to stave off boredom because, you know, we've been in the trash compactor all morning. Although I saw a piece of a documentary where it reminded me of how much fun we had. We were all escaping from the Death Star and running up the ramp into the saucer-shaped ship, and it was in between shots. And we were all goofing around. And it had a nice contrast, I thought, too, because we felt like we were strangers in a strange land. We were all so American, working with all these guys that went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts.
Come here, my little friend. Don't be afraid. Oh, don't worry, you'll be all right.
I was just so excited just to meet Alec Guinness, much less, you know, be in the same scene with him. And yet, it just makes me laugh because, you know, here he's one of the greatest actors in the history of the English-speaking world. And, you know, we're in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. But
They're headed for that small moon.
and, you know, there's a Wookiee and squibs going off.
Before you can make the jump to light speed.
But I kept referring to him as Sir Alec. And he tapped me twice and then gave me a pretty good, I said, what? He said, I want to be known by my name, not my accolade. To which I replied, what do you want me to call you, Big Al? He loved that sort of stuff. He loves American irreverence.
Go that way. You'll be malfunctioning within a day, you nearsighted scrap pile. And don't let me catch you following me, begging for help, because you won't get it.
I think one reason 3PO is a kind of lonely figure is his best friend is R2-D2, and they are, you know, really chalk and cheese, protocol versus sort of basic engineering, and yet, as with all odd couples, there is this kind of, I don't know, symbiosis, friendship, whatever you want to call it, that is all the cuter because it is odd.
R2-D2, it is you! It is you!
What is odd for me, of course, originally was that I quickly learned that R2 wouldn't speak to me, and I had to get used to that. So there is this thing, I think, that crosses from my brain to 3PO's, that how come R2 never says anything? And it's only when the magic of Ben Burt gets in there that, you know, that the magic happens. And one of the greatest joys was helping Ben Burt create and for me to speak Ewokese. And that was a bundle of laughs. But I'm pretty much script bound as to what 3PO says.
Trito Dogra, Isoyoto Amuno Noka.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
It's too big to be a space station.
The Death Star is a fantastic collection of exotic technologies, and it was a chance in the movie to do things with motors and with weird electronic tones and with loops of sound played backwards through reverb chambers. Because this was a powerful place with all kinds of technology, you could practically justify any kind of interesting sound, and therefore I had kind of a field day with it.
The thing that was unique about Star Wars was, you know, previously there had been some interior spaceships done in movies and TV shows and stuff like that, but the Star Wars films, and particularly the Death Star, were different than probably anything that had been done before. The Death Star was just massive. It was like, you know, you're inside of a massive battleship, and not just a large room, but many rooms and corridors. And if you look at sort of like the 2001 type of stuff, that is sort of like narrow corridors and bigger areas, but this was beyond that. And that was I think, a brand new idea.
The Death Star had to sound powerful above all else, and so underneath most of the ambiences in the Death Star, there's a rumbly kind of sound. Usually it's modulated up and down in some way, so it's not just a constant rumble because that becomes boring. But there was always an attempt to have sounds flowing as if the Death Star was always doing something. There was some kind of transition in energy taking place. And you went from environments, from corridors to the elevator to the detention area to the trash compactor. Each place was different, and there was gradations of mechanical and electronic sounds that were used to orchestrate all of that.
And one of the ways we elaborated on the scale, or added to the scale, was like the shot, sort of the Tarzan kind of shot of Luke and Leia swinging across that massive chasm there inside that chamber. That was originally a much sort of smaller set, still good size, but much smaller. It didn't go down very far because, you know, the actors could have been hurt and all that sort of stuff. So that was a painting extension that we composited in, so it looked like it was actually much bigger than it really was.
Obviously, there's hundreds of sounds associated with all the scenes that take place in the Death Star. But what would any Star Wars movie be without two of the most principal ones, which are the blasters and the laser swords? I still call them laser swords, by the way, because that's what they were called in the original script. The sound of the blasters was discovered by accident. I was on a hike with my family. We passed underneath the guy wires of a radio tower. I bumped against it, and the wire made a twanging sound. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's a laser gun." And that wire on that particular radio tower became the basis for all the blasters. The other principal sound for the weapons is, of course, the lightsaber. And the lightsaber, oddly enough, was the first sound I ever made for the Star Wars films. I had an immediate idea about it, even when I saw the artwork on the wall of George's office.
When I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
I remember when I cut together the first temporary version of the lightsaber fight between Vader and Ben Kenobi. At this point, no one had heard a lightsaber. It certainly, no sound had been put in against picture. And I worked alone for a few days in the editing room, cutting the sounds and mixing them together. And then we had a screening of the movie for the editing crew just to see where we're at. And I sort of sprung this sequence on them with the sounds cut in. And I got great reviews. It brought it to life in a way that hadn't existed, because now the swords had energy associated with them, and that energy came through the sounds that were, synchronized with them. And it was a very satisfying feeling. That sound never changed much. It never was challenged by anyone. George seemed satisfied with it right from the start, and I just moved on to the next thing.
I know tests were done on the colors of the lightsabers, everything like that. They originally tried to do it with actual front projection material, with a light right by the camera, so it looked super bright. Then they could do it, without any optical effects, and that didn't work out. So George had to go back, and somebody had to go and sort of animate each of those lightsabers for every single frame, and then color each one in different colors so you could tell them apart. And occasionally add flashes over the whole frame that gave it a lot of energy, and some little lens flares when they cross. All that stuff adds so much to it. If you'd left the lens flares out and if you left the flashes, it would have been much flatter. And that's one of the reasons that sequence is so much more interesting than a sword fight in a Robin Hood movie, because they can't do anything in those movies except just hit them back and forth. But in this case, it was really a wonder to behold, and a real feeling that there's energy in these two lightsabers. When they touch, watch out, because something could happen.
No!
When I met George, he was interviewing with Brian De Palma because he doesn't like to talk. Brian talked, and I talked, and then I went away. And he just was the guy with the beard that didn't talk. And then I got a call back. I felt I'd made very little impression on or around him. And then I met him again for a taped interview. And he might have said 10 words. He's quiet, I think, at work. Somebody visited the set. I believe it was a reporter. And after 3 days, they said, "Which one is George Lucas?" He's a totally visual guy. He thinks, I think, in visual metaphor, and he remembers things the way they look and how it impacts on him. I had gone to see them score the film in London, and they played me my theme. Everybody should have their theme. He was great fun that way, the player theme, because he's very childlike. And I was watching the movie, and they had some temp track with Holt's the planets playing over this unbelievable spectacle. And I looked over at George, and he was like this little kid. He was thrilled. He knew it was great. It was fun, and that was the most fun, I think, when he was scoring that picture and you could see it starting to come alive.
When I came on to the original Star Wars show, the models were already in production, the designs pretty much had been done, and I was involved in shooting them and getting these motions in the spaceships and in the backgrounds on film, so they would look as dramatic as what George had in his head. The movie ends with the Battle of Yavin, which is actually flying around the Death Star and trying to get that thing to blow up. And that was, of course, something that nobody had ever seen or imagined until George came along. And I remember walking in and seeing the Death Star ideas for the first time and thinking, what the heck is this? You know, this is, you know, this sort of canyon, all made by people with armament all over it, and it traverses the entire area around this battle planet. You know, it was a pretty amazing idea. We built a large Death Star model, probably about 4 feet across or so, for all the shots of the Death Star. Had a couple of shots that are like photographs of that were real small, so we could have it in the distance. And all the spaceships were built pretty much about 1.5 or 2 feet wide and shot motion control against blue screen, and then composited in over a starfield background with this model of the Death Star in it also. And we also had a big surface of the Death Star that was made, a couple of them, that were modular, and we could put them together into a large square of maybe about 30 feet square to do flyovers and stuff like that. And there were a lot of explosions that we shot on those things, some of them even out in the parking lot. The design was great, that both from a distance and from close up, you knew you were not visiting any moon or anything like that, or even a satellite. It was way beyond that, something that you really had never seen before. And that was a very compelling idea. The space battle was such a dynamic idea that George had in his head that regular storyboards would not have worked. So what he did was he found a lot of footage from actual war scenes that have been shot by aerial photographers and scenes from other movies, but it was all cut together with music, and we pretty much followed that stuff to get the idea that he was after. Everything's moving much faster, of course, than is in the real footage, because these ships supposedly are going, 1 to 5 to 10,000 miles an hour, who knows how fast. But it gave us a starting point. The spaceships flew just like regular airplanes would fly, pretty much. They would bank and then go off in that direction, as opposed to just being able to slide, which probably could have really happened. We contained the laws of physics in that sequence. It's not supposed to be real. It's supposed to be entertaining, and it's supposed to be really neat. The Death Star blowing up, it was shot by Richard Edlund, and he shot it looking straight up in the air at a regular explosion with a very, very high-speed camera. And we had no idea what was going to happen when it blew up. But what was surprising about it, and I remember seeing the dailies, is how long it took them to fall down from where the ceiling was, which was probably 40 feet in the air, past the camera in slow motion. So every 20 or 30 seconds, you see this beautiful explosion, and then stuff would just start coming toward you and coming toward you and coming toward you. But it all came after having, it was an accident, essentially. But an accident we took advantage of a shot that looked better than was expected when it was, when we actually did it. George looked at it, I'm sure, and just said, hey, the shot can run a lot longer. Then just boom, Death Star's gone. Let's have this satisfaction where you get a chance to hold on her for another 10 seconds, and you have an opportunity for the audience to release their emotion, feel the everything's settled, and this movie is now almost over, and the music can tell you that and make you feel very happy that you went through the experience, that the good guys won.